Historic Africa by discussing magic and divination. These are some of my favorite objects because, I'm sorry, what's better than thinking about something magical? At least in my mind, I think it's a lot of fun. So I want to show you a few things here, ending with my favorite, the hunters. So we'll start out looking at the Ifa cup and tray first. Now, how is this related to divination? So divination, if you don't know the term, is the idea of seeing the future or telling the future, to divine something. So when you look at divination as a practice, it's about trying to see the future or trying to predict the future. We'll talk about different divination methods in the class. For instance, when we look at China, we'll talk about the I Ching, in the process of using the sticks and the patterns or flipping the coins to divine certain information or certain future paths. Here, with the Ifa cup and tray, it's related to the god Ifa, who was thought to give help and guidance, right, to the people of Africa. But eventually, it's said in the lore that he became tired, right, of always trying to tell people what they needed to do. Basically, he just got overwhelmed with everybody coming to him and saying, "Oh, help us! Tell us what we should do. Should we plant our crops today? Should we take our goats to market now?" And he was like, "Oh, these people just need way too much," right? So it was said that he basically retreated to the heavens. He basically climbed up a palm tree and leaped into the heavens, and basically was like, "You're on your own now. Like I can't keep helping you." And the people were crying and like, "No, you can't leave us without guidance." And so it said he shook the palm tree, and a bunch of palm nuts fell out. And that's what the priests now threw, right, in order to divine the future. So, for instance, let's sort of think about how these two objects work here, the cup and the tray. The palm nuts, right, the nuts from the palm tree, would be kept in the cup. And they would be thrown out onto the tray. And then what you do when you do divination is you read the different patterns or designs in order to find information. So you would read a pattern and say, "Oh no, it looks like, we have, bad weather coming," or, "Uh-oh, it looks like, it might be a bad planting season." So they would read the different patterns of the palm nuts in order to divine certain information. And Ifa, the god, said, "This is my gift to you, right? This is what I'm giving to you, so you can now see the future as well. You can help yourself make your own decisions, basically." In the different shamans or priests of the communities, the Orunmilas, as they were called, would be the ones who would be tasked with reading the patterns and having the knowledge to tell the other people, "Okay, this is what the god wants us to do," right? Or "This is what I predict happening. This is the future that I see," right? That I can divine, right, for our community. So a very interesting way of thinking about divination. When we think about magic, I always look at the Yoruban twin figures. Now, I'm just showing you two, but if you Google Yoruban twin figures, you'll see it's a very, very large-scale practice, right, done by the Yorubans. We believe this started out because the Yorubans had a very high twin birth. Originally, this was thought to be evil, and so twins were persecuted or even killed. Then one of the queens, right, or the wives of the rulers in this tribe had twins, and that all changed. Then twins began to be seen as luck, good luck, right, for the Yorubans. And that's better that changed because, as I said, they had a high twin birth rate. So it's better for this to be a good symbol than a bad symbol, especially, it happens quite frequently for whatever genetic reason in their population. Well, this being Africa, there was often a high infant mortality rate. There was often a high probability that either one of the twins would die or both. Really up until probably about the last 20 years, this has been very, very true, right, in most African tribal cultures, is that a lot of babies die because of the conditions that they're living in. So the twin figures, what we think happened was they developed as a way to honor the lost twin or both lost twins. They were a way to memorialize their memory. And it became a very complex process where, just like with the Mbari houses, these artists have to be highly trained in sculpture. They have to be trained in the different types of, I guess we'd say, traditions about the deceased in the culture. They have to go through different rituals to find the tree that they need to use for the wood, for the sculptures, etc. There's a lot of pre-planning that's very ritualistic in how these things get made and how they're created. They can be very stylized. They can be very realistic. It really just depends. I kind of picked somewhere in the middle right here for you. I think these are stylized, but they also have a little bit of realism to them as well. But again, this was a way of, in a sense, kind of creating a magical connection between the living and the dead and trying to honor, right, the twin that had passed on, or if a family had lost both children, a way of honoring both of them. As I mentioned, the final thing would be my favorite, which is the Nkesh or the hunter figures. This is definitely one of my favorites from African tribal culture to talk about. And I think it's a great example of magic in art. I think it's also a great example of how something loses its potency or its purpose if it's used too much, and how it can be retired in a sense, and then maybe wind up in a museum. Once again, it's not serving its original purpose. So what are the hunters? The hunters were objects that were made to create bonds between a question asker or truth seeker and the person employing it. Typically, a shaman or a magical person, a priest, we might say in the tribe, would be the person that controlled, right, these figures. So if you had a question, or if you were seeking truth, you would go visit this shaman or this priest in order to ask him to use the hunter to find your answers. And the scenario I always use is someone stole your goats. So you're a villager, someone stole your goats, very bad, and you want to know who did it. You want answers, right? You want truth. So you go to the shaman, you say, this is my question. I want to know who stole my goats, right? Who did this? And he would then open the cabinet where he would store the hunter, because typically these things were highly prized and revered, so they'd be stored somewhere, very reverently. So you'd open the cabinet up. Often you'd then have to wake up the hunter, so he would yell at it. When gunpowder came along, they would often light gunpowder, so it would bang, 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 wake up the hunter. And then he would say to you, the hunter is awake, ask your question. So you would ask your question, and then he would take a nail, and he would drive it into the figure, sealing the oath that you were creating between yourself and the hunter. And then the hunter, in a sense, would hunt for your information. Now here's the fun part about the nail. What would happen is you were supposed to go out in the village next day and say the nail was driven into the arm. Let's say the right arm, right? You were supposed to go out in the village and look for somebody who was rubbing their right arm, like, ow, my arm. And then you'd be like, oh, goat thief, right? So the nail was supposed to inflict pain, right, onto the person who had stolen your goats. And that's the way you were supposed to find out the truth, right, about the situation. Now, if you're thinking about voodoo, yes, there is a connection between African slaves who were taken from Africa and the practice of voodoo. The hunters were linked to this heritage. So when African slaves show up in America, right, they transform the hunter into something similar but different. And so the practice of voodoo is linked to these hunter dolls. But again, you would create this oath, right, and the nail would solidify it or seal it between you and the hunter figure itself. Now, I'll point out a couple things that this hunter actually defies. You usually weren't supposed to put nails in the head. The head is considered the seat of intelligence in African culture. So normally the head is left free of nails. Why it happened here, I can only guess that this hunter was very good at what it did and people didn't want to stop using it, perhaps. So maybe that's why. And then the shiny mirror you see in the stomach was the center of the hunter's energy. It's where the fetish was kept. And fetishes were usually related to the shaman's family in some kind of way. It was a source of their power. Sometimes it was grave dirt, hair, different things from the line of shamans. And they'd be placed in the stomach, and then the mirror was placed over the top to reflect any bad energy, right, away from the fetish so the hunter could be energized. This hunter is now in a museum. So we talk about with African objects, they have utility and they have purpose, but often that utility and that purpose can be exhausted. I think when they started to move up into the head with the nails, right, that's when this thing was starting to be overused. Often, collectors would come along in Africa and say, oh, we want to buy this stuff from you. Well, the funny thing is I know that tribal cultures, what they do is they sell off stuff that they already think is exhausted. It's already done. And so what we look at in museums very often in the Western world are things that African tribes already said, well, that doesn't have any power for us anymore. That's why we gave it to you. It's because it doesn't have any power. So when you're looking at these objects in a museum, you're seeing them sort of in an environment where they're sucked of their life, right? They're not in their original context anymore. And if you went to an African tribe and tried to buy an active hunter, it would never happen, right? The things that you see created for tourists are just that. They're created for tourists, right? So these living objects, they're not allowed to pass out the hands of the shamans or the people who use them until they've been exhausted, until they're done doing their job or having their utility, right, for these people. But I love these hunters. There's just something about them that I find very compelling, this idea of wanting answers, wanting truth, and using the object to seek that out. That's, to me, the most cool type of magic, right, that you can consider. Next, we're going to look at colonialism in our next video lecture.